Coming out at work, something I've talked about a few times in the past. It's an often necessary and often stressful part of the transition journey. Many of us have gone through it. But why not make it even more stressful than it needs to be? Why not have your boss know that you're trans before you even fully come out full time? Great. So as some of you may know from past videos, I started my transition in fall of 2014 and then came out full-time in November of 2015. Part of this many step process involved coming out at my old job, the medical device company I worked at from August 2013 to about June 2018. I have talked in the past about a few things I did in figuring out this process of coming out at work, like figuring out what steps to take. I talked about writing a letter to my company to explain the situation, to spending a ton of time weighing the pros and cons of whether I wanted to try coming out at my current job or try coming out in between jobs, finding a new job and quitting my old job, coming out, and then starting the new job. Totally not stressful at all to handle that on top of, transitioning and living my life as a different gender than what the world had saw me in my entire life. So another part of this coming out journey, specifically coming out at work journey, was figuring out, is there any way to tell in advance how my boss might react? I'm sure there are various ways you can go about this, ranging from I don't really know and I'm not going to spend any time thinking about it and I'm just going to hope for the best, to choosing a very obvious and not at all stealthy approach like I did. If that's your MO, keep watching. I was feeling particularly stressed at work one week in the summer of 2015. Long story short, a few sexist assholes at work were being sexist assholes. Shocker. The typical sharing of sexual conquests and treating women like objects and thinking that I wanted to hear any of this because they saw me as a guy at that point. Joke's on them. I told them to fuck off, but in, a professional way, as professionally as I could. Your behavior is unprofessional. It's gross. It's sexist. It's dehumanizing. Please just stop. Stop assuming that anyone wants to hear these things. Keep those thoughts in your head. Better yet, just don't have those thoughts at all. But despite all this, I wanted to share, more fully why I felt the way I did. But I struggled to kind of put it in words without risking outing myself, kind of explaining my perspective as a woman who's not quite out yet. So instead, I was just this anxious ball of stress, my typical MO that entire year before I came out. I doubt any of y'all can relate to that. Thankfully, those worst people were eventually fired, but that toxic and sexist work environment at that point in time certainly made the coming out process more stressful. I was certainly concerned how a certain number of people, certain specific people, might react because they didn't typically react to anything well if it had anything remotely to do with LGBT people or women. This work environment was stressing me out, and I had to figure out who I could talk to and tell, and how I could tell them, I'm struggling to authentically navigate these issues without outing myself, and I'm going to explode if I keep this all in. One of the first people I actually came out to at work was one of my coworkers. Let's just call her Amanda, not her actual name, but just for privacy reasons, let's use Amanda. She had actually only been working at this company for maybe a month or two before I came out to her, but I just got that vibe that she would be supportive. It's hard to explain, but y'all probably can relate to that feeling, when you just know that someone feels like a safe person. You have that gut instinct. Like maybe they won't fully understand or really understand at all what I'm going through as a trans person, but they'll be there to listen and be there to support me. She had her own office at the time, so I just asked if I could meet with her privately during this particularly stressful week, and she could tell that something was wrong, something was off with me. I was quiet for a moment, sat down in her office, and then I started crying as I started trying to say what was on my mind. I told her all of this stress I was experiencing related to, these particular situations at work that were pretty toxic, and then I eventually said the words, I'm transgender. I didn't know if she would understand what that meant, what it meant generally, or what it meant specifically to me, but she did exactly what I would hope for someone in that situation to do. She just gave me a huge hug and asked me what she could do to help me and support me. From that point on, she actually became my closest friend at work for the next 3 years until we both left the company in 2018. So at this point in the video, you might be wondering, Chloe, What does any of this have to do with your boss? Be patient, my beautiful viewers, because I am about to tell you. A few weeks, maybe a month after I came out to Amanda, she asked me if I wanted her help in trying to pick the boss's brain on how he felt about trans issues and trans people. My initial reaction was, please. I have no idea how to get this information from the boss without totally outing myself. It's going to be super awkward and uncomfortable. So if you're willing to try to have that conversation, go right ahead. So she had lunch with the boss a few times, and having lunch with the boss wasn't out of the norm for her. They had lunch together at least once a week, every week. She just decided to gradually have this conversation over the course of a few weeks. And I don't know exactly how this conversation started or the exact details, but I remember these pieces. She told me that he was basically like, okay, you're asking me these questions because somebody at the company is trans. Okay. You specifically are asking me these questions because somebody in our department is trans. Okay. And then eventually, oh, is it Chloe? I mean, he used my dead name at the time because she's the only one in the department who doesn't have a beard. By default, I guess I was the most feminine one, so yay, stereotypes. He figured it out. My boss ended up knowing for at least a few weeks before I came out to him officially. The exact timeline is a bit fuzzy because, this little thing called stress. What I really appreciate, though, is that he didn't tell any other coworkers and he didn't pressure me to start the conversation. He actually just waited until I was ready to start that conversation with him. One day, and I think it was the end of October 2015, I felt ready to send that email. I was just like, I need to come out. Let's fucking do this. I just sent him an email, briefly told him I'm trans and I think you already know, and he's like, yeah, I already know. And then we set up a meeting that same afternoon. He told me that he had never ever had an employee at any place he worked at that came out as trans, and he wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation, but that he was willing to do everything in his power to make me feel comfortable and make sure that I stay, because he really wanted me to stay at the company and stay specifically working in that team. And I felt very appreciative at the time, and I still feel appreciative of how he handled that situation, especially when we consider a few additional factors other than like the sexist toxicity at the workplace. There's also the fact that we really didn't have much of an HR department. We had one HR person, and this was only a small portion of her job. So it's basically we had like a quarter time HR person. And, she helped me out in a few situations, like the situation of that transphobic coworker that I posted a video about, I don't know, 6 months to a year ago. Be sure to check out that fun story if you haven't already. And there's also the fact that my boss is quite politically conservative. To put it very succinctly, let's just say that two of the politicians he most supported at this time were Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. Yeah, so I thought I was going to have a little more of an uphill battle with him coming out as trans. But all in all, that part of the coming out journey went pretty well. It was a little awkward, a little bumpy, but I think it went really well, all things considered. And there were definitely some bumps that happened after that, but I think I'll leave it at that for today. So what are your reactions to the story? Can you relate to anything based on your own work experiences? How did the coming out process at work go for you if you have come out at work? Or for those of you that haven't, what steps are you taking to kind of plan through that process? Let me know all of this and so much more down in the comments below. And as always, Little Miss Tipsy and I, of course, love you all and hope that you're staying safe and sound. If you have not done so already, please be sure to give this a huge thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and notification bell. I love you all. Bye for now.